mass of people joining the call, and we will be accepting more people as we go in the next few minutes. I just want to make sure that everyone is muted before I start introducing the museum
Okay.
Amber, could you mute people, since I don't have that anymore, since you're the host? Yeah, I can't. Wonderful. So now if everyone can hear me, thank you all for joining us this afternoon on Friday, the 7th of August. I would like to introduce myself really quick. My name is Bishara, and I am the founder and the director of the Museum of the Palestinian People, based here in Washington, D.C. Everyone can hear me. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon on Friday, the 7th of August. I would like to introduce myself really quick. I am the founder and the director of the Museum of the Palestinian People, based here in sorry, I think we're experiencing some technical difficulty.
Oh, that was my fault.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, excuse us. Thank you all for joining us. Just a little bit about myself. I grew up in a little town of a very famous town called Bethlehem in the West Bank. And I also grew up on a farm that's also outside of Bethlehem, where my family has had this farm since 1916. And it's now currently being threatened to be taken away by the Israeli military to build a settlement. And so my family has been there for generations. And I was really inspired to, one of the things that inspired me to start this museum and to start this initiative is really my family struggle and seeing like that, how educating people is so important. And I came to Washington, D.C. in 2011, and as any tourist coming to the city, going to the museums, monuments, and memorials, going to different, seeing so many people who came to this country, and especially DC, to share their stories, I couldn't find a place where the story of the Palestinian people is being told. And this is where that sparked the idea of creating a museum, especially like being a Palestinian in the United States. I saw that the story of the Palestinians, that we notice it in the news, that it really reduces us to like a short item where we are, victims or we are violent people, right? And so the museum really offers a third way of showing Palestinians as human beings, showing Palestinians with stories like Hasan and others who have joined us on this call and on this Zoom events. Showing us as artists, as entrepreneurs, as also people in politics, in Congress, as people in Hollywood, and not just, Palestinians in Palestine, but also as Palestinian Americans who have contributed and still contributing to America in general. And really, our goal is to really create this possibility where the view of the Palestinians in the world is being transformed, and a new view emerges by people, when people come to visit the museum, or when people come to these Zoom events. Of course, using art, using culture, using storytelling, and to really transcend political, religious, or racial borders that we create between us, and to invite visitors who come to discover themselves and to discover their humanity by getting to know us. Just a little bit of how we have arrived here. We were a traveling exhibit for a couple of years. We went around the country and we brought different arts and artists together and history and artifacts. And now we have a permanent space that opened in June 15 of 2019. We have had so many visitors, around 4,000 visitors since we have opened, since March, and we had to close for a while, for 4 months. And now we're actually reopening on a limited basis on Saturday, where if you come visit, if you're in DC, if you're able to come to DC, Mo is one of the lead volunteers, lead docents, who will take you on a tour in the museum with a cup of tea. So we invite you to follow us on social media. We have a lot of announcement on events and Zoom calls such as this with Hasan and other artists and other concerts that we're hosting. We're inviting you to come and see the museum. If you're in DC, we're open on Saturday. We are allowing 5 people at a time. Of course, wearing masks, we have sanitizers, and we're taking all the precautions that's possible. And the other thing we invite you to do is that we are in this uncertain time where we're losing so many visitors, and as a museum who's counting on visitors to come and to visit the museum and to contribute to the museum, we have lost a significant visitors this year since March until this year, the whole year, with limited visitation. So we invite you to join us and join the Resilience Monthly Club to contribute $19 a month to sustain the museum and to help the museum offer more programs and stay open in Washington, D.C. And so thank you for being here. And I want to leave it with Mo, who's going to start this conversation with Hasan today. Thank you. Thank you, Mo.
Yeah, thank you, Bshara. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. This is our third and hopefully more episodes with Hasan Hammami. Hasan is a Nakba survivor, and he grew up in Jaffa before becoming a Palestinian refugee at 15. And so this has been a tremendous pleasure of mine to welcome Hasan and for him to share his perspective and his life about growing up in Jaffa at the time. But before I pass it on to Hasan, tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Hamad Al-Khatib. I'm a volunteer with the Museum of the Palestinian People. I've been involved with the museum pretty much shortly after it's opened, and it's been a wonderful and it's been a privilege to be part of this group, because it's so much more than a space. It is a collection of stories. It's a collection of of stories. It's a loving place, and we really encourage you to stay up to date with what we're doing and to find ways that you can to contribute to our effort and our cause. So with that said, I'm going to pass it on to Hasan. Today he's going to be talking about life in Jaffa. Jaffa is, as you know, a coastal city in Palestine, and it was a centerpiece of commerce and a beautiful city. It was a centerpiece of commerce, of Palestinian culture before the Nakba. So thank you so much, Hasan, for joining us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Bshara. Thank you, Muhammad. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Is my image okay?
Yes, it is. It's great.
Okay. Before I start, I would like to ask all of you who are with me to join me in a private prayer this morning for the lives and livelihoods of our brothers, sisters, and our friends in Beirut, in Lebanon. My soul weeps for Lebanon. My heart bleeds for the Lebanese people. Lebanon, unfortunately, has been in the gun sights of many enemies outside and inside. We pray for Lebanon and the Lebanese people, and these problems will one day hopefully disappear. Let me talk about myself. I am Hasan Hammami. I'm 87 years old and a Nakba survivor from Jaffa. Back during my childhood, Jaffa was a prosperous city on the old spice route from before the Bible. We lived in a big house that after the Nakba was used as a retirement home for 70 years for a company, for profit. And they had in it close to 30 old people, and they were making money. In the past 2 years, along with my uncle's house next door, they both were torn down, and now they're being converted. They're building a 5-story, 5-star condominium that is being built by a wealthy Jewish woman, apartments that will be up for sale for several $1 million each. I feel robbed over and over and over again by people who came from Europe, claimed our country, claimed our home, our culture and cuisine, claimed all of our assets, took all of our assets and rewrote our history, denying our existence and labeling us in worse terms than their ancestors were called in Europe. This is not about me, it is about the truth. And today is about the truth of life and stories of life of a charmed childhood in Jaffa. I could talk a lot about many memories, about when my brother Hussein and I saw a man coming to our house with a little instrument box. He was the circumciser. Or I could talk about the tree that I've never seen a tree as good as it for children climbing over. It was a several 100-year-old ficus tree, sometimes called a sycamore ficus. Or I could talk about my first bicycle and my brother's first bicycle, or our school trip to Galilee with the school and all the things that we've seen. Many, many stories. I'm going to focus 2 or 3 important elements and then go into some of the stories before the end. Jaffa was the largest city in historic Palestine during the first half of the 20th century. That's before Israel was in existence. It had a population of more than 80,000 people in the city, plus around 40,000 persons in small towns and villages in the neighborhood. About 60% were Muslim, 38% were Christian, and 2% were Jewish. 60% Palestinian Muslims, 38% Christian Muslim, and 2% Jewish Muslims who've been living together for years as neighbors, as people who were Jaffites. Jaffa was also the cultural capital of Palestine, being home to tens of the most important information systems, whether they were newspapers, the largest radio station in the Middle East, printing presses, publishing houses, including daily papers where one of them was called Palestine, meaning Palestine, Ad-Difa, defense, and Ashab, the people. The largest broadcasting station in the whole Middle East was absolutely amazing. Jaffa also had the most ornate cinemas, Al-Hamra and Nabil cinemas. There were several athletic clubs. I hope the picture hasn't gone, has it?
Nope, it's still here.
Yeah, I'm still here. Okay, that's what's happened to my screen. And a boxing club which housed the boxing champion of the Middle East, a young man who was the heavyweight in the Middle East called Ad-Dasuqi. Ad-Dasuqi was amazing. I was, just a secondary school graduate. The Near East Broadcasting Station actually helped turn Jaffa into a cultural hub in the city from 1941 to 1948. Its music program brought orchestras and singers from Cairo, Beirut, and other places. Famous ones like Kulthum, Abdel Wahab, Asmahan, Sabah, and the station built its own Near East Broadcasting Station music ensemble. Its schools, the schools in Jaffa, were many, girls and boys schools. Its schools taught several languages in their curriculum, Arabic, English, French, as well as in Italian. And Amriya was the largest of the schools, and it was a public school. The Greek Orthodox school, Tabitha Mission School, Hosni al-Asmar, Terra Center, Tabitha Mission, and the Italian nun school, which not only taught Italian, but also had like a finishing school. My two eldest sisters, Nahida and Fazia, once they finished their secondary school at Tabitha Mission School, an Anglican school, learned painting and other fine arts in the Italian nun school. Jaffa became the most industrialized city with factories that built buses. Almost all the buses that worked in Palestine were built in Jaffa on chassis and engines that were imported. They had soap making, carpentry, cabinet making. But Jaffa was also a cosmopolitan city, an integrated city, the most prosperous. It had several hospitals. And of course, it had the most advanced agribusiness and famous one in Palestine, which is the Jaffa orange business, which exported in the 30s over 10 million boxes of oranges per year. And in the years after World War II, over 12 million boxes a year. I'll talk about it a bit more later. Now, let me talk about my school first. Muhammad is going to ask me a question, but rather than contrive it, I will just flow through.
Yeah, just go through, it's fine. Yeah. And just to say, I'm going to be sharing a slide deck of pictures of Jaffa while Hasan is talking.
That would be wonderful.
Yep.
The school I went to was an all-boys French Christian brothers school called Collège Saint-Joseph, where we studied in Arabic, English, and French. In the elementary years, in 7 years, we studied Arabic as a language, English as a language, and everything else in French. So that at the end of the 7th year of the elementary, we passed a French national exam called the Certificat d'études primaires. So we could, in fact, begin to learn to be able to do business with French people, with France. In the high school, everything changed. We continued to learn Arabic as a language, French as a language, but everything else, geography, physics, chemistry, history, etc., all in English, so that we would be able to also conduct business, because it was also a small town, but by that time very, very prosperous, and commerce was important, communication was important. And so in the school, it was all boys. All Palestinian boys, Palestinian Muslim, Palestinian Christian, and Palestinian Jewish boys. After centuries of invasions and occupation by the Romans, the Byzantines, the Crusaders, the Ottomans, and then the British, Palestinians developed a tradition of religious tolerance and living together as a community, as a society. Religion was a private part that was mutually respected. I lived through ages, 15 years, where tolerance was a normal thing between people. That is the history of Palestine. That's the history of the country I grew up in, the one I spent my childhood after my parents, their parents, and their great-great-grandparents lived in it. But in Jaffa, the most palpable and most observable thing about Jaffa, like many cities in Palestine, I say it for me because I lived in it, was the harmony that existed between Palestinians of all faiths. Church bells, when they rang in harmony with calls for prayer and chants emanating from mosques nearby. Now, Jewish synagogues do not have church bells or minarets, so that they were respected equally. But Palestinian Jews were part and parcel of our society, not a national minority. They were part of the nation. They were Arab Palestinians. They spoke Arabic. They prayed in Arabic. They did business in Arabic and also with the other languages. Unlike Jerusalem's old city, which had essentially different sections, the Moroccan quarter, where many Moroccans and Moroccan Jews came from Spain, was one area. The Armenian quarter was another, the Christian quarter. Jaffa had no such thing as different quarters where people of different religions felt. Our own home was surrounded by the Kayali family, Muslims, the Mannes, Christians, the Andrawis, Christians, the Ghattas family, Christians, the Bawashis, Christians, the family who owned the flour mill and the house. I forgot their family name. They were Christians. The Dajanis, Muslims, the Yassins, and my two other uncles, also Muslims. Jaffa had a very diverse group also of ethnic non-Arab minorities for years, Greeks, Italians, Armenians, and they were integrated, they were respected. Like the most sophisticated, you might say, many supermarkets were actually Greek. The Greeks had special bakeries and so on. The Armenians had the skills, the mechanical, artistic skills, but we all lived together. Kids played together and had neighborly relationships. We shopped in the same stores, ate the same fresh food, same cuisine, attended the same movies, listened to the same radio station. We lived together. My memories of Palestine reflect my hope for the future of Jaffa being reborn in the way that it ought to be and the way it was. One integrated city in one politically integrated state with an equal place for every person, every religion, every ethnicity, not taken over by one religious group or one ethnic group, no matter what they think God has given them or what they claim is the case. Now let me go back to the city of oranges, Jaffa oranges. The Jaffa orange business really started in the early part of the 19th century, but on a very small scale. It was labeled, named the Jaffa orange. In fact, actually, rather cynically, Israel in the last 10 years have copyrighted the name Jaffa orange as a copyright that is owned by Israel. Can you imagine that? But the Jaffa orange business exported 12 million boxes of Jaffa oranges a year. A box was maybe about 1 meter wide by half a meter, divided in two. And those brought an annual revenue of 12 million pounds sterling per year, 80% of which went from and went through Jaffa. At the exchange rate of that time, that meant about $55 million free on board of revenue per year. That was a lot of money at that time in 1946, 47. In the 1930s, after World War II, before the Nakba. And it was run not by large agribusinesses like we know in Europe and the United States. It was run by small growers, small family citrus groves, small exporters, small suppliers, as well as businesses that provided wooden crates, nails, soft wrapping paper, where every orange was wrapped in paper, printers, banks, trunks, railroads. The only large agribusiness dealing with oranges was actually started by a Zionist enterprise called the Histadrut, and they owned a number of groves that they actually classed together. It was a big agribusiness called the Pardes. But the whole business was organized by a cooperative called the Palestine Citrus Board, which gave export quotas to any exporter who was able to qualify to show that he can export at least 10,000 boxes. The Jaffa orange business was the largest magnet for seasonal and year-round workers. For seasonal workers during the season or orange season from December through May, which brought workers from neighboring villages, laborers in South Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Egypt, Jordan. My father, Hasan Hammami, in 1947-48 season, applied for and got a license for 24 quarters. That means he undertook to export 240,000 boxes of oranges in that year. 240,000 boxes of oranges in that year. As a boy, he showed me how he did some of his business. During summer school, I would go with him and he would take me on visits to orange groves that he didn't own. He wasn't a big landowner, but which he wanted to contract to buy the whole fruit season. He would check the quality of work by the farmer, by the water reservoir that there's there, the water channeling system, the condition of the trees. And he would ask me to count the number of rows of trees that there were in one direction, and he would go on the other side to count the number of trees per row. And then we would meet in the middle, and he would multiply the number of rows times the number of trees per row and estimate, therefore, how many trees there were. And while doing that, he would also have a good estimate of how many boxes of oranges he could get per tree. And he was interested in oranges, trees that could produce 15 to 20 boxes each, not less, because it's a sign that the grove was not well cared for. He would separately offer the farmer, who's a resident farmer, a monthly pay on top of his meager pay by the owners to care for water, drain, etc., to assure that he would get the best possible product and maybe an extra 2 to 5 boxes per tree more. That's what was the basis for his success. So he was a modern businessman with an orientation in a certain Renaissance way in terms of relationship with people and smartness. The Palestine Citrus Board, this cooperative, usually received payment when the shipment of oranges were delivered in Europe and paid the exporter, like my father, 6 to 8 weeks later. In the 1947-48 season, the season was cut short because of the first Palestinian-Israeli war before Israel started. And particularly when the 3 Jewish terrorist gangs, they were classed as terrorist gangs, the Haganah, the Stern, and the Irgun, started gaining the upper hand with the help of weapons that were left by the British and by the history of the British rule in Palestine, where almost every British High Commissioner, which was like a governor, was often a Zionist or a Jewish Zionist. The first one was Herbert Samuel, and he wrote his own ticket. It's estimated that all the fruits exported from Jaffa from 1948 on during that season had been paid for by the customers in Europe and the money received by the Palestine Citrus Export Board, but not disbursed to the Palestinian Arab exporters and the people behind them whom they borrowed money from in the banks and so on. Then it was taken over by a newly invented department that Israel invented after 1948 when it was founded, a department called the Guardian of Absentee Property. The Guardian of Absentee Property. We were called absentee property. And this was invented to take over all, not only the oranges in the banks, but all Palestinian assets. I mean all assets, banks, homes, businesses, public and private property, etc. And in the mid-1950s, that department, the Guardian of Absentee Property, was all turned over through a new law that Israel coined at that time, turned over to the Jewish National Fund, which is, I consider it a legal ploy of the greatest robbery in the 20th century. Those payments, along with all of my father's and other Palestinian Arabs, were taken over by Israel anyway in the bank and protected by the incorporation laws of the Jewish National Fund and the Israeli laws that they wrote, that it is owned by Israeli Jews in perpetuity. Well, there's enough on this. Let me talk about, let's say, some of the other stories. One Friday, when my mother had the radio on Friday on a spring day, and the radio on at noon, where it was broadcasting the Friday noonday prayer with the windows of the house open. It was like what the Italians do with Italian opera. The sound, the chant of the prayer as well as chant from the Quran is very musical and very attractive. Next door, a priest came to visit our neighbors, Abu Mina Rattas, next door. So my mother saw that he was going. She went and turned the volume down. Mina Rattas shouted over and said, Hasan, why don't you turn the volume up? Please, it is wonderful, we love it. And I don't remember whether it was my sister Nahida or Faizi or my friend Mina Ghattas, who now lives in Boston, told me this story. But this is the nature of our society. In another story, my father brought Hussein and me one day several gifts, a lot of gifts. It was not a holiday, it was not an Eid, it wasn't a birthday. There was no special occasion. We were quite surprised why he had all of these things to the house. And one afternoon after we come back from school, we were playing outside and we saw a gentleman carrying a small instrument box. And it said, we knew who the guy was. We saw him. He was actually a circumciser. And he had his name on it, and he had scissors on. Horror, my brother Hussein and I, we understood the reason for all those gifts when they came, but we couldn't hide. Well, we succumbed to the circumciser's knife and wore a loose garb for a few days, and which we held gingerly away from our body so as not to hurt our organ, which were wrapped with medical gauze. On a school trip one year, when we went to Tiberias on a bus, this is a Frere school, to Tiberias, to Lake Tiberias, and some of the places where Jesus started his first mission in northern Galilee. And one night after visiting Nazareth, we stayed in a large convent in a hill above Nazareth. That convent is still there. It's a huge convent. And the convent we stayed in had a large auditorium where we spent the night. This was a school bus of about 30 boys and one Christian brother, Frere Kotzka. There was a ping pong table at the end of the auditorium. And after the lights were out, like maybe about 8:30, we all had to go back to bed to our mattresses, and the lights went out. But no sooner than the lights were out, that two of us snuck up quietly without the lights on, picked up a ping pong table bat and a ball and hit the ball. It went ping, pong, tock, 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 and fell on the floor. As it fell on the floor, of course, Frere Kotzka, got up, turned the lights on, but by the time he turned the lights on, we were already back in bed. He couldn't find the culprits. A few minutes later, we repeated the trick again. He still couldn't find the culprits. By the time we did it the fourth time, the stage at the end of the auditorium, there was a stage with the curtain drawn. The stage curtain at the end of the auditorium was opened violently and showing a Polish officer who was from the Free Polish Army, naked practically, started covering himself up with the end of the curtain, screaming at us, obviously for disturbing his love affair that night. He was meeting with his Polish girlfriend. Obviously, she was a nurse, and they had this date that evening, and they couldn't find anywhere to sleep, so they slept that night before they slept anyway. And she was in bed, up trying to cover herself up, and he was yelling at us in Polish. It was a scene like from an opera comique. All the boys on the trip immediately sat up, applauded, and cheered him. Well, he stopped shouting, he pulled the curtains back in, closed, went back to bed. Well, I'm not sure he went to sleep, but whatever it was, all the boys were wondering what was going on behind the curtain. Now to a more serious story. The story of a student society in high school. There was a society called the Académie Française, meaning the French Academy. And it was volunteer, and it was meant to advance French plays, French books, literature, and culture. Well, that was in 1945, the year the war ended. So a group of us small boys got together. We decided we wanted to start an Académie Arabe, the Arab Academy, not only just to learn about culture in France and all that. So we asked for and met the headmaster of the school, and he contributed the idea. He liked it. So we started one. We had our own very wide ribbons made with nice colors and so on, meetings and so on. And 2 years later, the Academia Arab became the nucleus of the 14 and 15-year-old students who wanted to join civil defense in Jaffa as the fighting started between Israeli Jews and Palestinians, particularly the Zionists who came, and the 3 terrorist groups. So we were organized with a first aid group, which was being formed under the leadership of a man from Jaffa. He became famous later on. His name was Shafiq al-Houd, who became one of the Palestinian leaders with Dr. George Habash. Both went to the American University of Beirut, and others who started the political movements of Palestinians in the diaspora, the PFLP, Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, the PLO, and some others. And in our first observation of a surgery after our training in first aid, we were to watch a surgery in the Anglican hospital where a young Palestinian defense fighter was being operated on to sew up a gash in his leg above his knee, quite a big gash. And 3 of the brave teenagers actually fainted and went boom, fainted. It was watching blood, watching sewing going on. I thought I was going to faint, but I managed to watch the surgery to the end by breathing deeply and thinking about the poor injured guy. On another story about our love of the sea, with my father during the late spring and summer and the early fall, he would always take us for a swim in the morning in the Mediterranean, in a part called Shat Hanna Syriani Beach. Hanna Syriani was another Jaffite person who had opened this beach and had a small cafe restaurant. We went for an early morning swim, a shower, and a quick breakfast, and then went to school. Really, really fond memories. The first time I went back to Jaffa in 1993, the year after I retired, and I could travel with a US passport, I found that beach, and I knew why my father chose it. It was fabulous. The water was limpid, and it was kind of covered on one side by rocks sticking out, so it was always calm water. Good place to teach kids to swim. And another story, when at the end of the war, I'll have to get my phone, excuse me. Hi, you can watch me while I'm on the program. Are you?
Oh God, is it tonight?
It's now, yes, it's tonight. You can watch me on my iPhone while I continue. This is Rima calling from Jerusalem, my middle daughter. Rima, I'm glad you're here. That's a good way to join us. At the end of the war, we started able to import things. So my father bought me a bicycle, a Philips brand bicycle, as soon as the imports were open. And it was very different from my brother Hussein's bicycle, which was a very sporty, sexy looking Italian racing bike that Hussein was willing to wait to get it. My bicycle opened up great outdoors opportunities for me, including cycling along empty beaches for miles south of Jaffa with limpid water on one side, and also or seeing the new Jewish colony of Holon, southeast of Jaffa, which at that time had something like 20 separate small white houses, supposed to be an agricultural kibbutz. So the first time I went there on my bicycle, it wasn't an agricultural colony, it wasn't a kibbutz, there wasn't a single tree, there was no lawn, and all its houses were empty during the day. And I realized that all the men and women would take a bus from there to Tel Aviv in the morning and come back at night. So it was not an agricultural kibbutz. As it turned out, it was chosen there because it became a launching pad along with Bet Yam or Beit Vegan, the other Jewish village south of Jaffa, for Jewish terrorists attacking Jaffa from the south. I can go to the other story of my first political speech as a boy, I think of 12, when my uncle Hasan Hammami, he was, by the way, the father of Saeed Hammami, who was the Palestinian representative in England in the 70s, and who was assassinated by the Mossad in the 1970s. And my uncle Adel was running for the city council, for a seat on the city council. My father wanted to promote his older brother's campaign, so he arranged for several tents to be set up in the space in front of our houses, food being served for potential voters, a speaker system with a powerful speakers set up. And I was asked to give the welcoming speech, and it was very short, but very loud, given by a 12-year-old boy. It means, I welcome you in the name of the Hammami family. Please vote for my uncle Adel Hammami and enjoy your meal. It was enough of a political speech. And another day, another story of my childhood, when my cousin Ihsan Diab, who was my cousin on my mother's side, his mother and my mother were sisters, and his father was caught in the United States during the World War II. He couldn't come because there was no transport. And so he was raised by his mother and by my father and a family next door. Hassan wanted to operate on a cat on the roof of our house. Can you imagine? You know, he was all of, I think, maybe 14 years old. And he found this cat, which was alone, wanted to play with it, but thought he had ideas about being a doctor or something. Well, of course, the cat won. I mean, she left him with scratches on both arms. Ihsan later on emigrated to Chicago, where his father was, and became a US citizen, fought during the Korean War, went to the University of Chicago using the scholarships that were given by the GI Bill. Thank you, Rima, for being here, and became professor of pharmacology and in the University of Chicago, held a seat, and he died at age 50 in 1982 when he was working 24 hours a day to promote the Palestinian cause in the Chicago area when Israel invaded Lebanon, destroyed half of Lebanon. He died of a heart attack then. Well, we lived in Palestine. We did not come from the desert. We were a complete nation. We were integrated. We were small. We were cosmopolitan. Our history shows that we always welcomed the stranger who came in peace. We welcomed the stranger, known as al-Gharib, who came in peace. We welcomed Abraham, our patriarch, when he came with his family from Ur, Mesopotamia, in old Iraq. Some of our ancestors who liked his message converted and followed him. When Jesus rose, we welcomed Jesus. Our people welcomed Jesus. When he was born, we followed him, not the Romans who had occupied our country. Some of our ancestors, including the children of Abraham's followers, who had become, joined us and were our citizens, who were then, when they heard his message and liked its meaning of helping the poor, the weak, and chasing money changers out of the temple, became the first Christians. And when the message of Islam came at a time when the two regional superpowers, Byzantium and Persia, were at war with each other, killing each other, but mostly not killing their soldiers, killing the locals in each side, and enslaving the people of Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, were at constant wars. When the message of Islam came, and our ancestors who were both Jewish, Christian, and some didn't have a religion yet then, who heard the message of Islam that everybody's equal in the eyes of God, and they liked the message, they became Muslim. When the Crusaders came, they were an equal opportunity slaughterer. They slaughtered, attacked, and slaughtered many of our ancestors in Jerusalem, in Acre, in Jaffa, with no distinction whether they were Christian, Jews, or Muslims. Our ancestors stood together against these invaders. Despite all the claims otherwise, we have nothing against the Jews or Christians. We are, Palestinians, are Muslims, Christians, and Jews, the Arab Jews. We don't want any invaders. We want our freedom. We want equality for all. We want no special privileges to anyone, to us, or no special rights, no special preferences for anyone. We're not a large people. We are a weak, small nation, but we have something special. The special that we have is that our nation, our people, fathered and mothered all three of the monotheistic faiths. Our roots are deep. We will overcome. I thank you, and any questions you have, we can start. Thank you so much. Mohammed, take the questions, take it away.
Thank you so much, Hasan. That was amazing. We have quite a few questions, so we're going to start from the beginning. The first question that we got was from Samira. Samira had quite a few questions, but she says, do you know if there was a railroad between the towns in Palestine?
Yes, there was a railroad that went north to south that joined railroads from Lebanon and Syria through Palestine all the way to Gaza and then to Egypt. That's one. And it also had branches. There was a railroad branch from Jaffa to Jerusalem. There was a railroad branch from Haifa to some places in the northern Galilee. Railways were one of the earliest public transportation made. The original railroads in that area at that time were actually built by the Germans for the Ottoman Empire, because Germany wanted to build a railroad from Europe all the way to Basra. It was called the Berlin to Basra Railroad. Some part of it later on got called the Venice Simplon or the Venice Express, European Express. And there was a station, the slides that you showed the station, railroad station in Jaffa. And that railroad station had trains from Jaffa to Jerusalem, or Jaffa to Haifa in the north, or to Gaza and Egypt in the south.
Did you ever take the railroad or the trains?
My father and my mother, I was told, maybe it's too private a story. I was told that possibly I was conceived on the railroad by my father and mother when they were coming back from a trip in Egypt.
Hey, you can't go wrong. I mean, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Well,
that was great.
Yeah.
All right, so there's another amazing, excellent suggestion from Gail. She said, have you considered collecting Hasan Hammami's stories into a book, and perhaps NPP could apply for a grant to support an editor? And I think that's a really great story worth exploring. We definitely want to have something featuring Hasan's stories at the museum. So this could be definitely an idea. Bonnie, I can answer your question. There is a mayor in Jaffa right now.
There is no mayor in Jaffa. Jaffa, for many years after 1948, became essentially like a slum, because Israel essentially chased 98% of the population and less than 2% stayed there. My neighbors, the Andrawuses, told us the story of what happened in the first few weeks after Jaffa was evacuated. Can you imagine? 98% of the population of the country were evacuated under fire. And there were many people, young men, who were left to look after people's properties on the idea that we'll be back in about 6 or 8 weeks. All of those young men, like guards and gardeners and so on, were collected by the Israelis, shot, and their bodies thrown in the Mediterranean. The other Palestinians who were left there were all joined up together and put in one small quarter, Al-Ajami quarter, and it was surrounded with barbed wire. They were not allowed to get out of there for several years. And Jaffa was left to rot, except places which was ready, like my father's home, my uncle's home, all were taken over, lock, stock, and barrel, fully furnished, you might say. Food in the granary, in the city upstairs, and it was taken to house new Jewish immigrants who came. I call them immigrants, really there was no legal way in which they came. They came against the will of the people of the country, and they took over all of the banks, all of the stores, everything else, and for many years would not allow any Palestinian who had stayed in there a building permit to add a room if their family grew or whatever. Finally, they incorporated Jaffa into the municipality of Tel Aviv, and it took a long while before that produced something that was useful. In Jaffa right now, there are approximately between 25 and 30,000 Palestinian Arabs, different families, many of whom came from the Galilee, from Nazareth and other places, because it's it's still an Arab city. Number one, it's also a commercial city. And they started getting involved in the political system in Israel. And starting with 1996, that's 24 years ago, there has been one Palestinian Arab Jaffite who was a member, elected as a member of the City Council of Tel Aviv Jaffa. And 25,000 out of a population of 1 million is like only 2.5%. They didn't have enough votes among themselves to elect him. So they kind of allied themselves with the enlightened Jewish Israelis, the people who want to live like neighbors, like human beings. And there is right now a member of the City Council of Tel Aviv who is an Arab Jaffite. Also, one of my friends, Sami Abu Shhadi, whom I met the first time I went back to Israel, to Palestine and Israel in 1993. Sami Abu Shhadi was doing his PhD in University of Tel Aviv. He was the son of Mr. Abu Shhadi, who was a Palestinian fisherman who stayed. And they all figure in the book that was published called The City of Oranges. Sami Abu Shhadi was finishing his PhD. I'm proud to say that I was able to help him finance his last few years, part help in the university. He has been very active as a young man. Like his email address is Palestine Lena, Palestine is ours.
For ours.
And he became a member of Al-Rabita. He organized a group of adult men to become mentors and mentor young teenage boys and girls and direct them. And in the last Israeli election in 1919, he was elected to as a member of the Knesset. Yeah. Now, he's not a Zionist, he's not a collaborator. He's a Palestinian Arab who wants one nation. He doesn't want to live as a second-class citizen in a city that defines itself as exclusively first class to its people only and nobody else.
It's actually interesting that you mention Sami Abu Shhadi's name, because somebody in the chat, I think it was Nada, recommended him as someone that you should reach out to for
absolutely
to get a tour.
It's wonderful. I mean,
yeah.
for a while he worked as a teacher, but mostly as a tourist guide for people who didn't know anything, but he has been constantly active. I consider him a personal friend. My daughter Rima, who's on the iPhone next to me, is watching.
Hey, Rima.
They introduced me to him.
Cool.
But he's been constantly active. Hi, Rima, show your face. Say hi to everyone. Who's on the iPhone next to me is watching.
Hey, Rima.
They introduced me to him.
Cool.
But he's been constantly active. Show your face. Say hi to everyone.
We have feedback. We have lots of questions, Hasan. We have like 10 questions, so we're gonna move along. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. Iman asks if you're familiar with the Al-Banna family from Jaffa.
There were a large family, Al-Banna.
Yeah.
Very family. They were also citrus growers, and I think two of them were exporters. I don't remember their names because at the time it was a large family in Al-Banna. Very family. They were also
Hassan, is there a possibility to mute the phone because we can't hear you? There is too much.
Okay, thank you. I'll cut that down. Thank you, Danny. They were also
Hassan, is there a possibility to mute the phone because we can't hear you? There is too much.
I've turned the phone off. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Is there a possibility to mute the phone because we can't hear you? There is too much.
I have cut the phone out. I'm trying to see what I can do to be sure I am.
Possibility to mute the phone because we can't hear you. There is too much.
I have cut the phone.
Yeah,
out.
Sorry, that's not me. That's the.
To be sure I am.
Possibility to mute
the phone is off.
phone because we can't hear
See
you.
what you can do with the system on your end.
It's
My video camera is turned on. My voice. Be sure I am.
There is a recording being repeated. Sorry for that, for this technical difficulty.
See what you can do with the system on your end.
It's rect. Can you just, the co-host, can you please mute everyone except Hassan, please? Thank you. Go ahead, Hassan. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. It was kind of an incidental thing. Next question, Mohammed, please. Mohammed, next question, please.
Mohammed, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now? Okay. So I'm just going back here.
Can you hear my voice, Mohammed?
Yeah, I can. I'm just trying to get back to my,
Yeah.
Salwa also asked if you knew the Sawabini family. They're also from Jaffa.
Sawabini?
Yeah.
Yes, I did not know them. I know of them. They were also an old Jaffite family. If Salwa is Salwa Hammami, hi Salwa. If somebody else, still hi Salwa. Sawabini originally is a word that's derived from soap, sabun, sawabin.
Oh, wow.
And so there was an active soap making business industry in Jaffa. One of the most famous ones is, in fact, in the old city of Jaffa. It's a very old building. It's owned by the Damiani family. My friend Gabi Damiani was at school with me in a Frere school in Jaffa, and his son, out of all places, is a doctor now, Carl Damiani. He is a doctor of infectious diseases in my small town of Jaffa in Florida. So we have, in the diaspora, I estimate that today there are probably 1 million Jaffites. If you were, say, 100,000 at the time of the Nakba, and the population has grown by a factor of 10. The roughly 100,000 will have produced. And I know there are Jaffites in Australia, in Canada. I don't need to, but give me your other questions.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So this is a comment from David, and we'll hopefully get through all of these, but So he says, Hassan's comment about the Israeli towns of Holon and Beit Tiam were particularly interesting to me. I've known of those places for decades, but only known them as contemporary cities. From what it sounds like, at least part of the logic of the Zionists in founding these towns there was very much like the logic of putting settlements around Palestinian cities in the West Bank to block them in and prevent them from expanding and to be poised to eventually take them over.
Actually, it was one of the earliest examples of that. Bet Yam, at that time was called Bet Vegan because it was established by French Zionists who bought the land, had a large beer factory, beer brewery built near the edge of Jaffa on the southern side. And that beer brewery building on the wall that faces Jaffa, on its lower wall, did not have any windows on it. It had actually gun slits, guns, meant by gun slits, which is, you know, as a kid, I thought, well, they must want to do something. It was pre-planned. It was part of the plan of essentially surrounding. Jaffa was important to be surrounded because it's number one, it was a port. The Israeli terrorists were afraid that so-called Arab navies, Arab ships would come into Jaffa and form. There were no Arab navies. The Arab armies were unequipped, badly led. They were disorganized. They had no chance.
Yeah.
We were disarmed since the Arab revolt against the British twice in the 20s in 1936 because we didn't want the British in there. You know.
My grandfather said the same thing. He said, you know, everyone thought that, you know, the Arab army was going to invade, and they were so powerful. It was so far from the truth. They were severely underarmed and under-resourced. So,
yes.
Okay, let's move on. There's a beautiful comment by Madeline Reed. She says, Mr. Hammami, thank you for enlightening me, an American Jew, on the beautiful history of your people. I've learned so much, and I continue to pray for peace and understanding in Palestine. May you live long and well. That was really beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you. May I suggest to you to read the book City of Oranges, City of Oranges by Adam Labor. It's about 6 families in Jaffa. Jewish families, Palestinian Jewish Arab families, and Palestinian Christian and Muslim families. It's a good book. He's a good friend of mine. And there's a part of it that I contributed to Adam Labor's book. City of Oranges.
Right. City of Oranges. Thank you. That's a good recommendation. Justin Haas had a question. He's like, Hasan, what do you think the historical fundamental policy of Israel is towards the Palestinians today? Is it genocide or removal or even second-class citizenship? Can you share? I mean, this is a big question, but if you can just...
I think that, you know, the facts are with us every day, okay? Israel wants to have all of the historic Muslim and Christian sites under its control as part of a tourist attraction, as part of the history of Israel, so-called, even though they're not Israeli. Israel has finally, 2 years ago, written the nation-state law of the Jewish people, which is a law that became a basic law, meaning only the Jewish people in Israel have first-class rights. Only they can own land or do all sorts of things, and they're not. Everybody else is second, third, fourth, and fifth. In the occupied Palestinian territories, all of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and also in the Golan, which they occupied from Syria. They really want all of the land. In one of my next shows, I'm going to show you the story of an Israeli coin, on the back of which there's an image, coined in the image of Greater Israel, which contains all of Palestine, all of Jordan, all of Lebanon, most of Syria, part of Iraq, right up to the liver. I think the concept of Zionism is to rebuild the image of Zion as it was in their brains. Of course, it was never fully Zion. There was actually a Jewish kingdom, acted as a kingdom of David. It lasted, Jewish history, it lasted only for 40 years. All the others were really not kingdoms, where actually it was like the presence of Jewish tribes, Jewish families in those areas. I think it's Israel's, if they're able to, they will take advantage of every trouble that's going on in the world and take another inch, take another bite, take another loaf, take another 1,000 acres, take another river. And they've taken over the natural gas fields off the coast of Gaza. Okay, a huge gas field, which would be a a national asset for the people in Gaza. There are roughly 2.5 billion Gazans today who are left like in the largest open air prison, open air. I think ultimately this is what's going to bring Israel down, because the world has moved away from one nation, one religion. That was so in the Middle Ages. We're not in the Middle Ages anymore. So you can't run supposedly a modern democracy on the basis of ideas from the Middle and the Dark Ages. Next question, please.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so just a couple more. Bear with us, people. The first one is, this is from Muhammad Malas, and he asks if you've had the chance to visit Al-Lid, where the current airport is located.
Of course I have.
Yeah.
Interestingly, one of my friends in Jaffa right now, Abdel Qadir al-Satil, who was at one point one of the heads of the Al-Rabita. Al-Rabita is like the league. It's a charity organized, had been running for about 25 years, called Al-Rabita li-Ri'ayat Shu'un Arab Jaffa. He comes from Al-Lid. His father was an expert in grafting orange trees on lemon tree stock. The roots of a lemon tree are much tougher and able to stand things better than an orange tree. His father was an expert. Many of the groves that are still alive today were grafted by his father, Abdel Qadir al-Satil. Al-Lid, and I've been, of course, to the airport several times. I'll tell you a story. The first time I went, the year after I retired, my wife and I, Barbara, arrived on British Airways, and there was one other couple who arrived with us at the same time. His name was Dr. Abdi Shafi. Abdi Shafi was one of the members of the Palestinian Commission who was negotiating the Oslo Accords. So he was like one of the partners of the Oslo Accord negotiation. I saw the way he was treated when he arrived in Ben Gurion Airport, or now Tel Aviv Airport. It's called Ben Gurion Airport. They took him into a separate room. All walls were in glass. I could see we were in next door. They asked him to open his suitcases. He opened them, he and his wife. At the time, he must have been maybe about 70 years old. They took every suitcase and tipped it over onto the floor. Every single one. I was shocked. I mean, I knew that I hadn't talked to him. I hadn't seen him. I saw his picture. And they treated him like dirt. When he was coming out, I asked him, I introduced myself to him politely. He was a national hero. He was a humanitarian, he's a doctor. He gave his life to treating people, trying to do things in peaceful ways. What happened? He said, this always happens. They have to show, they have to prove to me, but also to themselves, that they are the ones who are in control.
Exactly.
He's the person whom they were negotiating the Oslo Accords with. It's terrible. They really ultimately do not want the Palestinians, any Palestinian in there other than ones who can stay as laborers and will say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so one more question, and and this is from Hiba, and I think we already asked this, but she might not have heard it, and this was about the Dajani family. I mean, you were familiar with the Dajani family, right?
I am indeed. Neighbors,
yeah.
Neighbors, one of them were the Dajanis. Yes.
Yeah.
What's the question?
Okay. No, that was just a question. If you were familiar with the Dajani family.
You know, one of the houses within walking distance from ours was the Dajani family. Across the street from us was my uncle Adil, then the Yassin, and then the Dajani. The Dajani lived in a 2-story house. They rented the ground floor to somebody, and they lived in the upper house. The older brother, Wa'il Dajani, was approximately my age. He didn't play with us. He was a serious school student. I've got several friends, Dajanis in the diaspora, in Lebanon, yes.
No, I was just saying in Lebanon, there's a very big there's a big presence of Dajani Palestinians there that I met when I was in school.
He comes from the village, originally village of Beit Dajan.
Mm-hmm.
So it is called Dajani. There are two villages in Palestine called Beit Dajan. So I don't know which one was started where, but it's a big family, educated. Oh, by the way, also very important, forgot that. One of the finest hospitals in Jaffa was the Dajani Hospital. It was built as a modern like German art style, which is very simple and absolutely fabulous. It was a great hospital, one of the leading Arab hospitals, Palestinian hospitals in the country. In Jaffa, there was the Vijani Hospital, the French hospital, the Anglican hospital, the government public hospital, the quarantine. Yeah, it was just a small town, but it was extremely advanced and well endowed. Endowed because primarily because of the people and their ability to develop and grow whatever they had, the Jaffa orange and everything that it brought in, money, jobs, livelihood, and so on. The picture that is now fixed on my camera, by the way.
Thank you, Hasan, for this conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's almost 1:15 right now, and I think it's time to close out the conversation. And
yeah.
But is there any last comments you would like to say before we close?
I see me, but not the photos picture, which is now fixed.
There we go.
Yes, I would like to say, the effort that you're doing from a very small scale, I can be like the single drop of water that falls on a perfectly still lake, and it throws out one circle after another of light and knowledge and peace and harmony. Like our voice can be like the fine voice of the sound of the wings of a bird who reflect what's going on and is spread out the cause for justice, for equality, for harmony, for mutual respect, and for really throwing out all of the mess that we have out there, which is concocted on the basis of promises from God and whatever, and then have people live with mutual respect, with mutual rights. And thank you for making this possible. And I want to say something about the next session. In my life, my next session will be session 4. We'll cover the 7 years, which I call the broken, the displaced years. That's when I became a refugee. We all became refugees. When I tried to finish part of my education and ended up in this disrupted area. I didn't have a nationality, didn't have a passport. We left all of our wealth, all of our assets were left in Palestine, fully furnished, as someone said, for us to take, but our roots never left. Our roots never left. That is the subject of the next session. It's about I call it 7 disturbed years, the 7 disjointed.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Hasan.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Muhammad, for facilitating this conversation, and thank you for all the audiences who joined us, for being with us, for the supporters who's been supporting the museum, whether it's monthly supporters or people who are supporting us every year with their generosity and with their time, as well as the volunteers who are behind the scenes supporting us, like Amber and Justin, supporting us with Facebook and all the technology that we're doing. We really appreciate. This is a collective effort, and everyone is like Hasan's story. is really touching and really an example of what Palestine looked like and what Palestine could be in the future.
Exactly.
And we are proud of you, Hasan. We're proud of your story. Like, you're putting your Palestine and the name of Palestine and high, and not just by your story, but who you are, like who you are in dealing with other people and your treatment for other people and how you are hospitable, and that shows the Palestinian story by itself. So thank you for being here.
Shara,
thank you. Yes.
I have a request for you before you turn off.
Yes.
I see several friends of mine on the screen. Is it feasible to keep it on for a short while longer? I'd like to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can close. We can definitely. I will close out. Thank you, everyone, and we really want to invite you to be part of the museum. We have a monthly program to join to sustain the efforts. $19 a month, 3 cups of coffee, to support the museum and to sustain the effort for us to do more of these events and to keep the museum open, and of course expand the opening after this pandemic is gone, hopefully soon, and keep the museum alive. So
Okay.
thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you in the next Zoom session or in person at the museum on Saturdays.
Yep.
Indeed.
All right. Stay on if you want, but we're going to head out. So enjoy your call. All right.
On, please.
Okay. Of course, it'll be going.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Banks. How are you?
Hello?
I'm trying to talk to the Banks. What happened?
Sorry.
There they are.
Sorry, hello, Hasan. We were muted.
Oh, you both look well. Thanks for showing up.
Oh, you look marvelous.
Say hi to
What's your kid?
us also. Hi, Mina. Hi, Mina. Thank you for coming. Mina, hi. Lost him. Let's go to the Mahlis.
Hello, Hasan.
Hi, it's lovely to see you. I am so glad
Yes.
we're together. This is absolutely, it warms my heart. It brings great memories, and it's good to stay in connection.
Yes, for sure. Thanks for connecting about a month ago. You've been a gift to our family for sure.
You brought a great joy into my life. You really did.
Yes.
Yeah, we feel close to our dad when we see and hear you. So thank you, Hasan.
Thank you, Hasan.
All right, hang on. Let's see. There you are. Can you see me?
Yes.
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 Oh, wonderful. Good. Take care of yourself. Stay away from the virus.
Yes, we will. And we'll be on. We're looking forward to the next
Wonderful.
seminar.
Indeed, thank you. I'm going to go to Elias Fahid.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much, Elias. It's wonderful to see you. I appreciate it.